Welcome to In Such a Time, conversations on Jewish life, leadership, and meaning. Each week, Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy explore the moments, questions, and ideas that shape who we are and who we aspire to be. And now for this week's conversation.
Welcome back to the In Such a Time podcast. And today, you and I, Rabbi Londy, are really going to focus our time on a story that has sort of taken the Jewish American world by storm, coming out of this op-ed piece in the New York Times by Nicholas Kristof, and then a lot of the responses as well. And so let's really get right into it here, because I think there's so much to be said and to be taken apart here. Tell me a little bit first about where are you in your reaction to this piece, and what are some of the things that are on your mind?
So Nicholas Kristof's piece is about the notion or the claim, the report that Palestinian prisoners have been systematically sexually assaulted, abused, raped by Israeli soldiers, by animals. And first of all, it gives me a terrible stomach ache to read that. When I hear, as a human being that loves other human beings, whatever their creed, race is, when I hear about human rights infringements, that makes me really, really sick. When I hear about human rights infringements that have been committed allegedly by my people, by Israelis, by Jews, that makes me even sicker. I also have a question mark. What is the validity of these claims? I'm sure that there is truth in them in some way or another. What is the timing? How is the timing relevant to the reports that have come out about the October 7th atrocities, where Hamas used systematic sexual assault against the Israelis? So I'm filled with just really kind of a sense of dread at having to even talk about this topic at all. We so often, the internal conversation and the external conversation are sometimes different. What we want to portray to the outside world is, Israel isn't so terrible. There is a moral backbone. And sometimes the internal conversation is, oh man, look at what Israel's doing. Look what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'm feeling a bit of lack of alignment between those two places right now. I want to be able to claim moral integrity for Israel in the internal conversation and the external conversation at the moment, and I'm at a loss. How about you?
Yeah, a lot of what you say really resonates. For me, I think I'm feeling a lack of balance or grounding, and that has to do a lot with the fact that I think that there are different members of our congregation and community who live in very different worlds and are privy to different parts of this conversation. I think there's a certain part of our congregation, and even certainly of the country, that are completely unaware that this conversation is happening and something is roiling a certain section of the American Jewish world. Then there's another section, probably of our congregation, who see the New York Times as the best equivalent to the New Testament, as to the truth, like as you making a face, but see it as being on par in terms of their identity and understanding of how the world works and moral clarity. That if it's fit to print, the New York Times, then it must be so, and therefore that there is an incredible indictment of Israel in this moment. Then there is the subset of our congregation who are aware of this and are also aware of the lengthy discourse of criticizing, taking apart this questioning, talking about biases, and really poking a lot of holes in there. There are definitely large holes in the story. That doesn't mean that there's no truth in the story. And I want to go back to what you started with in saying that there's this real sense of disappointment and dismay when we feel as though Israel, as a symbol of the Jewish people, is not living up to its ideal. And I want to connect it to something that probably very few of our congregants know about in the news, but I'm sure you heard about. Back on Yom Ha'atzmaut, there was an event in which a bunch of teen hooligans went into a pizza shop and they were spraying silly string, and they were annoying all of the guests who were just there having pizza. And the young employee, a Ethiopian Israeli man, told him to please stop it, and please, that they were annoying and they were really doing harm to the people trying to eat there, and they beat him to death. And just now that they've come out with the indictments, and one of them is actually being now prosecuted for death, others for abetting. The fact that like in today's Israel, like a group of Jewish teenagers could beat another person to death because they just said stop spraying silly string on top of the people trying to dine and eat here on Yom Ha'atzmaut, all the more so on Israel's anniversary. I see like the look in your face too. Like I read that story and my heart just sank. And when I have the same idea of Israel so undermining its basic principles of democracy, that I think that's what hurts the most about this piece is that um, we don't want it to be true. And then there are certain parts where it sounds like it's not true, but there might be certain parts that are true. And I guess for me, the real question is about the word systematic. I think that in any military, there are going to be people who do bad things. And
Sure.
you know a lot of your former students in Israel became soldiers, and you know, think about an 18-year-old kid, a 19-year-old kid going to the military, that they don't always have the best judgment, the best discernment. Certainly in the US, when there was the Abu Ghraib scandal with the jail in Afghanistan, that was a moral blemish when there were stories of during the Iraq War of waterboarding and torturing, that the U.S. was engaged in such behavior, that was an indictment, and that Israel is already under such a moral microscope. And to hear that there were, if there's any soldiers who were involved in such despicable acts, they should be prosecuted with the full force of the law. And I also, and I'll turn over to you. Um, it brings again frustration and anger at the current Israeli government, and specifically the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who has been outspoken of his support for treating Palestinians with greater violence and harm, and showing sort of no quarter to Palestinian prisoners in jails. And when he says dumb things like that, it opens the door for then people to take seriously not just some, but all of what Kristof is alleging here. And I think it ultimately betrays the vision of what Israel is meant to be. So a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, and a lot of fear of what this means in the moment. That's sort of where I am with this.
Yeah,
Does that just
it resonates. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I living in Israel, I was describing this to a friend. Um, it's, you can get lost in its beauty and the beauty in the society and how the society is woven together so intricately, and also kind of in a really chutzpahdik kind of way. It doesn't make sense that the country fits together. And then you begin to see the cracks, and you see the anger, and you see um, the lack of respect for the other, which comes out in all sorts of different ways. And I think after October 7th, then I know that there were accusations of sexual violence against Palestinians also before October 7th. But it was less reported on. And internally in Israel, that was a conversation that was, everyone said, no, we're the most moral army in the world. That couldn't possibly be. But I can see how a society where there's such anger and resentment and a sense of needing to vindicate the name of Israel after October 7th, how there's a slippery slope of how you could do terrible, horrible things. I am not condoning that. I'm saying I can understand
Yeah.
how you could other another, how people could get to a mindset where they other to the extent where they would commit war crimes. It is so disturbing to me. And one of the things that comes out, I think, within the internal conversation is what I said before, is that Israel's the most moral army in the world. There's no such thing as the most anything.
Right.
Moral grandstanding is so dangerous.
Right.
The moment that we think that we're incapable of doing something is the moment that something atrocious can happen. We have to always be wary of our ability to be cruel and mean and atrocious and vicious and beasts. And that's the work that we have to do every day, is check that at the door, and not allow ourselves and not allow other people in our community to act that way. So at this moment, I have such a deep love for the state of Israel, but part of my love is also concern. And in such atrocious behavior, and speak up and say, this doesn't represent my values. Um, just as you said, this needs to be prosecuted. I hope that Israeli society takes this seriously. I hope that people are outraged in the way that people in the diaspora are. And also, it doesn't help the Israeli cause. It doesn't help us look better to the rest of the world. Every time um, such behavior, such horrible things happen to Palestinians, or the allegations come out against Palestinians by Israeli soldiers, it makes it harder, I believe, to live as a Jew in the diaspora.
So here, I'm going to divert from you a little bit here.
Please.
I think that that's good. First of all, I think that the big question is not whether or not any violence was perpetrated by soldiers against Palestinians. I think the question is systematic. Was this something that was ordained by the leadership, that as a policy, that through leadership was instructed and was condoned, ordained by the military leadership? Or is this the case of certain individuals resorting on their own to terrible behavior? Because if it's systematic, that's a much larger allegation. In every military, in any war ever, there are always those who are going to, fall beneath the mark that way. The commission's report that came out this week about Hamas shows in painstaking fashion, reveals a systematic approach in which Hamas like premeditated that they were going to use sexual violence as a way to humiliate, torture Israelis.
Women, men, children.
All of it, and to hostages over 2 years, well documented. That is systematic. That is different than the quote unquote few bad apples. I think the big question that Israel has to ask right now is this the case of few bad apples, or was there instruction from the top in order to do so? And if so, there should be prosecution all the way to the top, up all the way to Security Minister Ben-Gvir, because that would be, it is that detrimental to Israel's standing. That being said, I know that you say that this is something that they would be so careful of because it hurts Jews in the diaspora. When Israel does anything that is below the mark, it is under such scrutiny and magnification that I think that there is an incredible double standard that we as diaspora Jews have to resist. And let me make an example here with a different case as well. You're probably well aware, about a month ago, the case of a Jesus statue in Lebanon being destroyed by IDF soldiers and mocked, and they had pictures with the Virgin Mary holding a cigarette in her mouth. And this made all the rounds of looking at what despicable things that these soldiers are doing. The soldiers were arrested, the soldiers were prosecuted, the IDF paid for and erected a brand new statue, apologized for it in the moment, right? Everything that you would want them to do. How many times has ISIS or Hezbollah blown up a church or a religious landmark? And to what degree does that get the same exposure in the press that when Israel or the IDF does this? That there is such an imbalance and such a double standard. And I actually think that we somehow, and Tim may disagree with me, I think we kowtow to anti-Semitism when we say, oh no, what will this make the world think of the Jews? And this is, I think, part of the dilemma here. Part of Israel's founding was to say we don't have to ask that anymore, and we don't have to care anymore. We do not have to chase the affection of the non-Jews. We're just going to live our life. And I think to some degree that opens the door to extremism, as like we see with Ben-Gvir, and that can ultimately be hurtful as well. Sometimes it's a good thing to have to ask yourself, what will the neighbors think?
I think that one of the first of all, I appreciate your analysis of that. Um, and I think that that's one of the themes that we've seen in Israel. That there are no neighbors to ask. So I've been thinking about this, that the times in Jewish history where there has been extreme corruption is when there wasn't a checks and balance system, when the priesthood, when the Kohanim became a corrupt entity because no one was there to check them, because they had absolute power. then that ultimately led to the destruction of that form of Judaism, and we had to reinvent ourselves. And I think that we're in a moment where there is not a check system. Perhaps maybe that's what the diaspora is for. That's what the rest of the world is for. But Israeli society, and again, having lived there and getting to experience the miracle that I really believe is the state of Israel, it's the modern day state of Israel, Jews getting to be free in a way that we haven't been able to be free or experience in millennia, that also comes with a very, very high price of what do you do in order to combat the rise in extreme ideas? What do you do in order to make sure that we're still acknowledging the values of the rest of the world? What do we do in order to make sure that it's still safe to be a Jew throughout the world? And so I understand what you're saying. The whole point of Israel is so that we have a place that is safe for us and we don't have to ask anymore what people think. But by definition, it affects us here. It affects us so deeply. It affects what people think about us. It affects how people look at Jews. It affects,
When
I
people
think,
mass outside of synagogues this week,
yes, I also think that it affects how people perceive the morality of the Jews in their life, the non-Jews looking at the Jewish community.
that is kowtowing to anti-Semitism.
I
A
understand.
Chinese person does not say, uh-oh, what China's doing in the world, people are going to treat me worse as being from China. A Russian person in America never asks that question. Why do we?
We need to hold, because Israel, I don't know if it's because Israel is supposed to be representative of certain core Jewish values. And I think when it's not upholding those standards, and again, there's such a double standard against Israel, no doubt, duh. But when it's not upholding the values that we hold to be sacred, which is the preservation of life and the dignity of all humans, then it's our moral responsibility for those who love Israel to say, guys, like, pause. What do we do? How do we reevaluate? What do how do we do better?
So, another distance, I think, between us here, although maybe we'll come to an agreement point. I agree with you that that we cannot slip towards such an autocracy, such as was experienced by the priest, or even let's say by King David or such. We see these moments of incredible arrogance in the Tanakh that always leads to the downfall. And I think that we see some leaders in Israel who, like Ben Gvir, like Smotrich, who exhibit that arrogance on a regular basis. However, Israel is still a democracy. Israel has a open and free press. Haaretz publishes op-ed pieces that are to the left of the New York Times.
Yeah.
There are organizations like B'Tselem in Israel that are documenting moments in which Israel falls below its democratic standards. I don't think that we're anywhere near a point in Israel where there is a lack of control mechanisms in order to bring people into in the democracy. You and I have both been witnesses part of the huge demonstrations that were going on every Saturday night for 2 years in Tel Aviv. We have friends who've been on the front lines of those demonstrations, friends who've been part of Histadrut, General Workers' Party strikes and such. There is a vibrant democracy and open free press in Israel. I don't think it's fair to say that there is no opposition whatsoever to the extremism that we see in Israel. It just happens to be that with the fall of the left in Israel after Oslo and the Second Intifada, and then especially after the departure from Gaza in 2005 and the resulting terror from Gaza, that the left in Israel has been snuffed out largely, and that to be on the left in Israel these days is as a minority position, but I think I understand why. But I don't think that's the same as calling it an autocracy or lacking democratic control mechanisms.
I think that the changing demographics in Israel and the rise in internal violence, for example, that terrible story of what happened in the pizza shop, I think that those are the people who end up in the army. Those are the kinds of people who end up committing atrocities. There is a denigration of certain values in Israeli society. I remember when we moved here, I took my daughter to a playground and with some friends that she made, and one made like a snide comment to her, And the mom came and apologized to me and also apologized to my daughter. And she goes, it's fine. Like in school in Israel, like people try to stab me. She was in second grade. People try to stab me. Here everything's great. She's like, it's not a big deal. And that's an extreme story, obviously. But I think that there is such a breakdown in Israel for all sorts of reasons, um, of of common of common decency in some parts of the society. And I'm afraid that as time goes on, that's going to trickle further and further into the army. That's going to trickle further into just the core of what the society is built on. I know I'm not the only one to think that. I also think a lot of the people who represent the more liberal values, which I think are checking the extreme right, more and more, and they serve such an important purpose. They're leaving Israel. Like they can't deal with all of the corruption and um all the moral quandaries that are arising. And so I I feel very emotional about this today.
Yeah,
And
understandably so.
that definitely informs my opinion. Um, but I just want to make sure that Israel, as we said, is living up to our vision of what it can and should be.
I'm going to push back again now if I can.
Please.
I think there's a danger of putting any country on a moral pedestal.
Of
And that
course.
Israel, we can talk about as being exemplar for Jewish values and such. I say personally, it's not.
Yeah.
It's just a country. It's just another country with all of the same problems and all of the same knuckleheads and all of the same issues that people deal with. I was listening recently to the Israeli journalist Moti Friedman speaking about a book that recently came out detailing the violence between Jews in Israel's founding 1945 to 1960, and that they're, you know, all of the leaders hated each other.
Yeah.
There was constant violence. There were death threats and actual killings of
Mhm.
different. I mean, the Altadena is like a great example of this, of shooting down a boat full of Jews who are coming in the pre-war time, and you can go to Tel Aviv and you can see it. Been there many times. Uh, the sign all about that. I think that it's easy for us to always say like society's in decline and this is the worst of times, and I think that sometimes that's because we put on rose-colored glasses and we lionize the past and those leaders. And I think that there were a lot of, as you would say in modern Israeli slang, nehoraim in that day as well as a slang for or an arse, kind of like thugs in Israel's own days as well.
Mhm.
Can I switch from this for a little bit? Is that okay?
I appreciate that.
So let's talk a little bit about Kristof's piece and a lot of the criticism that's come. I think that criticism could be divided in two places. Is number one in the sourcing of the article and then the timing of the article. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the sourcing of it first. Um, One major NGO that is cited, this Euro one in which they have, the leader has been connected with Hamas multiple times. They have in the past made accusations of fantastical accusations of Israel harvesting Palestinian organs, using them
Yeah.
in order to farm basically organs for Israelis. I think that they have succeeded in moving outside of the acceptable window of Israel criticism. And the fact that there was no vetting whatsoever there or any even disclaimer of their incredible bias is a huge issue. And then the fact that those that are interviewed, Isa Amro is one of them, I forget the name of the other one, both of them as well, on the record multiple times, celebrating Hamas, celebrating October the 7th, um, multiple times changing their story, which began as that they heard about sexual assault to then they were threatened with sexual assault, and now that they were sexual assaulted, the changing the story and the lack of any witnesses or of any greater testimony around that, and having such biased characters. First of all, I would just question, where is the New York Times editorial board and how did they see that to be fit to print? How did they not go to Kristof and say, I see you've got something here, but you need more in order to justify a publication on something which is rumors and innuendos by a couple of deeply biased sources that we know about
Yeah.
their biases. And then there's the issue of the accusation that Israelis train dogs to sexually molest, rape Palestinian prisoners. The fact that in multiple studies and press, it is impossible scientifically to train a dog to do such a thing. We have to keep in mind that Hamas you may remember these fantastic claims, claimed that Israel was fitting dolphins with lasers on top of their heads and using them to attack people in the Sinai. When there was a great white shark attack in the Sinai, there was the claim that Israel was training sharks to feed on Palestinians and to feed on Arabs. That there are fantastical, ridiculous accusations that are easily dismissed. And the fact that one such as easily dismissed as you can train a dog to perform this act on a human being, I think also so knocks out the knees from this op-ed to the point that it discredits Kristof so much. I wish that he had done his thorough time and research to actually put something in writing that would stand to the ground, that it would have to be reckoned by a larger swath of the population. Because as soon as they read these stories of animal sexual molestation trained, or of the sources, and you do just even a cursory amount of digging into who's being sourced here, the whole thing unravels, and that's ultimately a disservice to a story, because this is a really important story for Israelis to think and know about. And a certain part of the population is going to hear all of this background and say, oh, well, then there's nothing to this story. This is complete propaganda and the usual conspiracy theory. And so I don't have to worry about it. And that's actually detrimental. That's the worst thing of all, because these things ought to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and I think we have to also go back to the timing of the release of this report, which is the act, as you were saying, is the October 7th sexual assault.
The commission,
Yeah.
yes, probably, which was, it's been 2 years in the making, and everyone knew that this week was being published. It's a crazy coincidence that suddenly the moral inversion of this is being printed in the New York Times, just as we're on the precipice of learning about the depravity of Hamas in 10,000 videos and pictures, 140 witnesses, just, months and months and months and months of research. And then the chance that Kristof has to steal the media cycle with this story and effectively bury the story that's the real story about Hamas.
I don't know if one's a real story and one's not a real story. I meaning, yes, the October 7th, report is the story. If these accusations are true, that's also a story. I understand what you're saying.
But here's with the timing. If we give, let's say, Kristof the greatest benefit of the doubt, it's purely a coincidence. Let's give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. Say he's got a story brewing on this. He knows that this is also coming.
Yeah.
He wants to get out ahead of it. That still, to me, would be despicable. What I would think is maybe he's working on the story and he doesn't yet have all of his sources in line and doesn't have enough research done, but rushes it in order to get it out ahead of this major landmark study coming out. It was, so that, I would say, is journalistic malpractice.
So I had the privilege of learning from and meeting and getting to know Dr. Kochava El-Kayem Levy, who is the human rights lawyer who's been really pushing forward with this report.
Who oversaw this
report. And what's so interesting about her is she's a human rights lawyer who really, most of her research was about sexual assault against women. And she did not believe, this is a really sad story, she did not believe that there was an anti-Semitic prejudice. She didn't believe it, even as Israel. She didn't believe it her entire career.
There's no such thing as anti-Semitism.
She didn't say that there's no anti-Semitism. She didn't believe that. It was hard for her to actually believe that there was a bias. You know how something
like in the press.
In the press or in general in the UN. It was hard for her to actually internalize it. And she said that after October 7th, what she found, what totally flipped everything for her, and if she's listening and I'm misrepresenting you, then please correct me.
Call in, lines are open.
She said what was so crazy and unprecedented and what flipped everything for her is that all of these women who were on the Human Rights Watch committee in the protection of women, none of them spoke up after October 7th. And she said, this happened to my people and they were silent. And she goes, I have proof they were silent. And she changed her entire mindset and her entire field of research to really understand the bias and what she studied, and what she has. I actually don't. I know this has been very torturesome for her. I don't know how she like wakes up every day and reads these reports and interviews people, but she studied the idea of kinocide, that what Hamas did wasn't just sexual assault, systematic sexual assault, but it was systematic sexual assault to break down the institution of families, and to kill one person, or to
in front of the other.
in front of the other, or to rape somebody in front of the other, to take
Yes.
one person in front of the other, and all of it was to create, like, Israel is a place that is so fundamentally based on the idea of family being a core value.
Yeah.
And what they did was beyond just hurting, murdering, raping, pillaging Jews. It was tearing apart the very molecules that are Jewish Israeli society. And so I hope that Nicholas Kristof's article came out at this time just coincidentally. I hope it's a coincidence,
I
but
have a bridge to sell you. Yes.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. But we have to, it's not a but. We just always have to, we always have to see what's happened to us and be horrified by it, and bear witness to it, and then say, God willing, we are not doing such horrendous, terrible things as well.
What I worry about is that this pattern of moral inversion is intentional in order to allow people to get over the embarrassment, the shame over how Jews have been treated, and to say that it's justified. For those who committed genocide on Jews and bear that moral weight and stain, to say now, oh, well, the Jews, they themselves committed genocide, so it's not that bad because I guess just it's something that everybody does. So I am now unburdened of that shame. To say that Jews are an ethno-state racist or ethnic cleansing, now if I'm a state that I kicked out my Jews, if I didn't allow my Jews to buy property, if I didn't allow my Jews to hold certain professions, I'm unburdened of that shame because, well, the Jews did it too. So we're just all the same. And now here comes a report detailing for 2 years systematic sexual violence against Israelis. And now people could say, well, like the Hassan Pikers of the world can say, yeah, but Hamas, they're not that bad because this was being done to them too. And so this is really more of a tit for tat in the fog of war. It is the constant lowering of moral standards by accusing your victim of the very thing that was done to them. And then it all becomes morally relative. And we have taken out any of the actual measuring sticks of what it means to be a moral citizen in today's society. And this is my belief that why there is such a willingness to believe, but why Kristof, who has sort of been on this base for a long time in trying to call out the unrighteousness of first world countries against third world powers, in his view, that there is such a willingness to believe. I also think this goes to, I'm going to call it a Western racism. Western racism towards Palestinians is often to hear Palestinians say out loud, to read the Hamas charter out loud, we want to kill all of the Jews. We are not going anywhere. We do not want to share the land. The land is all ours. And to listen to it in a very arrogant way, say, oh, like they don't really mean it. They're just saying it. That's just like they're just trying to hold, and just sort of, I think Einat Wolf uses the word to West-splain to Palestinians that, oh no, this is actually what we think we mean by this, but they know exactly what they mean, exactly what they're doing. And I think that for Kristof and gang to lend authority to this view and to mask some of the more, to mask the most extreme things that have been said and done by the Palestinians, including by some of his very witnesses towards his report, and then to cast a huge spotlight on the Jews doing anything close to that. I think it is that Western moral relativism all over again. And I think that that feeds into that same anti-Semitic network.
I'm
There's a lot there.
Yeah. I'm proud. First of all, very, very articulately and well said. You think you think that it inherently feeds into anti-Semitism?
This essay, or the idea, this moral inversion in which you accuse the victim of everything that you've done to them? Yes, yes, and yes. I think that there is a desire, willingness by especially a lot of the European left, specifically, who committed these terrible atrocities against Jews, to be let off of the historical moral hook by being able to point the fingers and say, yeah, but the Jews do it too. And so we're really not that bad. And or maybe even worse, maybe the Jews kind of had it coming to them, because look how terrible the Jews are. So can you really blame us for kicking out our Jews? Look how depraved these people are. Look at what they're doing. It's the
No,
same idea
there-
that the same idea claim that the Jews treat the Palestinians the way that the Nazis treat the Jews, or the attempt to equate Zionism or Jews with Nazism,
I know.
right, is an attempt to lower the Jew to such a status, to the status of the Nazi. And by the way, in relating this now to living in the diaspora, once you call a Jew a Nazi or a baby killer, you have now dehumanized that person to the point that violence against that person is merited. If someone is a baby killer, if someone is a Nazi, if you call someone Hitler, well, then Hitler deserved to die. And so when people gather outside of New York synagogues and chant to globalize the Intifada and to kill the IDF, that they've essentially done this now. You have dehumanized Israel through your accusations and your crazy scenarios, that you now have legitimized violence against Jews. And I think that this is the circuit is now complete, and you have now been given permission, just like those people who would give permission to Luigi Mangione for killing a healthcare executive, because look at all of the lives lost to
Yeah.
the American healthcare system. You are doing the exact thing, and you are now lauding and creating martyrs out of those who would commit violence upon Jews.
I just don't want us to get into a situation where we're creating formulas that are ridiculous. I mean, we just can't. I agree with basically everything you said, but I don't want to get into a morality formula game where we're saying, well, look, like playing the opposite game, saying, well, look what's been done against us, and now look, perhaps Palestinians also have it coming. I don't think anyone here is doing that. I don't think anyone is saying that. I mean, certainly in Israel, there are those who say that. I think that we hold them accountable for for that terrible kind of rhetoric. I just get very fearful of any of those formulas being played out. I think it's so important that we just say there is right and there is wrong, and we need to call out right and wrong where it exists, where it happens, where there's a lack of right, where there's a lack of morality in the world, and see ourselves as part of maintaining that. And I've said this before. It's so I mean, I gaslight myself all the time into believing that anti-Semitism is not a problem. I mean, I know it is. We've talked about this. I know it is because I've experienced it. I know it is because I work in a synagogue that's fortified. I know it is because I'm a studier of Jewish history, because I'm living in Jewish
If
history.
you say that you don't believe or there are times you will, that, would you ever stand on a subway track late at night in New York City with a kippah on?
No, I'm saying that even though I know it to be true, even though I know that anti-Semitic tropes seep into every which way of our lives, um, it's still so hard for me to comprehend it, even if it's in front of me, because I refuse to believe as a human being that there could be such inherent hate, and in disregard for truth and disregard for another person, because I'm a human being that wants to see other people as humans. So that's something I got to work out. I understand.
No, I wish I could live in that world. I'm a little jealous.
I think it's sometimes living in La La Land. I don't, I mean, also when I was living in Israel, I knew that there was threat. I didn't always feel the threat.
Yeah.
It could be in front of me, but I don't want to acknowledge it, because to acknowledge, to acknowledge the threat, to acknowledge danger, to acknowledge violence, to acknowledge um, not being safe because I'm a Jew, it's kind of too hard and too painful to have to live with every day. And so it's not a choice. My brain maybe compartmentalizes it.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to go back to sort of circle around to the beginning here and to say that everything you say makes total sense to me, and that I fear that through the haphazard and lazy editing, publishing of this op-ed piece, that it discredits it to the point that Israelis themselves won't take it seriously.
Yeah, I hope that's not
If
the
so, that
case.
is an incredibly missed opportunity to have a moment of a cheshbon nefesh of, is this happening in our name, in our country? And if so, what's happened to us to allow this to happen? For a people that brought to the world the idea that we are created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, how can we be the people that then treat others, as despicably violent as some of them may be, in such a cruel and inhumane way? That reckoning deserves to happen, and that debate, that discussion in Israel needs to happen. And I worry that by the way that New York Times has done this, it actually is a disservice, and people will just retreat to their ideological camps.
I think that that's a really good point. For anyone that's ever met an Israeli, especially an Israeli who's living in America, they're often super educated, very philosophical, are dealing with the moral issues that are coming up. And I know, based on the people in my life, that those who've had to serve in units in the army, that have had to confront Palestinians, or have had to either work in the territory, do their army service in the territories, or had to go into Gaza, are dealing constantly with seeing a human being in front of them, and also having to confront what they have to do to that human being, in relationship to that human being. And a lot of people leave the army with in a real moral sense of enigma. And
I know a lot of Israelis have gone in as liberals to the military and have come out much more conservative.
Oh, and I know the opposite. They've gone in very conservative, and they've come out as liberal, because all of a sudden they have to confront what they're doing to Palestinians, with Palestinians. And so I think that, to label any group as one thing is so dangerous, because every single person who is serving in the army is having their own experiences, having to go through their own reckoning with themselves, having to process it. And so I think that if you know any Israelis who've served in the army, I pose this question to them: what do you think is going on? How do you hear it? What was your experience in confronting these issues, and how has that changed the way that you go about in the world?
So let's, if I can, I love that. I want to end this with a plug that on the Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend, after Shavuot, we're having here Yitzhak Sokolov and speak with his Palestinian counterpart about their 20+ year relationship in trying to forge dialogue in incredibly difficult circumstances, and to trying to find the B'Tselem Elohim in one another. I think that's a really powerful opportunity for our community, and I hope that those listening to this podcast will come and join us, because I think that we need to prop up and to support all of that we possibly can, especially now.
Agreed. I think that the best way to combat seeing another human being as an other is learning who they are, learning their story, learning their perspective, being curious and asking questions. And I'm so proud of our community for hosting that program, for being engaged in that kind of dialogue.
Amen, and onwards to better days. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on In Such a Time. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Rabbis Jonathan Jaffe and Leora Londy, or to connect with Temple Bethel of Northern Westchester, visit bethelnw.org, or follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Temple Bethel NW. Thanks for listening.